The Highlands Heights Police Department receives a 911 call from Shayna Hubers, who reports to the authorities that she has shot and killed her boyfriend, Ryan Poston.
Campbell County 911. Ma'am, I killed my boyfriend in self-defense.
Gunshot wounds to the head and to the torso of the body.
But is this really a case of self-defense?
Shayna made a mention that she was thrown into the television.
She claimed to have been thrown into the bookshelf. There had been this fight between them, and he was taller than her and bigger than her, and he was throwing her around the apartment.
Or is it the work of a vicious and calculated green-eyed killer?
I shot him twice. His body was completely dead, and he was laying there still.
It was our job to make sure that for him, justice was served.
On an October night in 2012, the police force of Highland Heights receives a 911 call. A Kentucky woman, Shayna Hubers, has shot her boyfriend Ryan Poston 6 times and claims that it is in self-defense.
Shayna reached out to law enforcement through the 911 call. She claimed that she killed Ryan Poston in self-defense. In fact, those were some of her first words. It was the first sentence that she relayed.
She made representations to the 911 dispatcher of this violent struggle, that there had been this fight between them, and he was taller than her and bigger than her, and he was throwing her around the apartment, and she was in this struggle for her life.
Campbell County 911. Ma'am, I killed my boyfriend in self-defense.
Following Shayna Hubers' 911 call, police dispatchers make their way to Ryan's condo.
I responded to the call. The other officer was working as well. He responded with me. We got into the building, and then, because it's a secure building, we had a neighbor let us in. I asked the neighbor if there was any shots that they heard or anything like that. Neighbors didn't hear anything, but they were working on their apartment. We get up there, we contact the 911 operator, and we tell the 911 operator to tell the person to come out with their hands up, which was Miss Hubers.
The dispatcher's talking to Shayna Hubers the whole time. The dispatcher tells her that, when the officers get there, that she wants her to open the door, tells her to put the gun down, and Shayna did tell the dispatcher where the gun was and walk out the front door with her hands in front of her.
At that point in time, she came out with her hands out. She was yelling. I couldn't even make out what she was saying. And I told her to shut up and get on the ground. We put handcuffs on her and got her out to the car.
She's the one who identified the victim for us, because at that point in time, we didn't know who it was. But Shayna told them first on 911. She said the person that I killed was Ryan Carter Poston. And she mentioned that he was an attorney from Cincinnati.
The first thing we had to do was, once we took Miss Hubers into custody, I searched the apartment to make sure there was nobody else in the apartment that could hurt us or hurt anybody else.
Once in there, he did see the body of Ryan Poston laying in a pool of blood.
He was laying behind the kitchen table. And when I checked his vitals, I didn't feel anything, so I called for the squad personnel to come up. I wanted one person to come in because I didn't want them to disturb the crime scene. How it was, I didn't turn any lights on or anything like that, because you want to keep the scene as is. So I made sure that I watched how they were walking and where they were walking at. And I wouldn't let them move a lot. I didn't let them move the body at all. Just had to move the shirt up so they could put the pads on the back so they could get a rhythm, to see if they could get a heart rhythm. And they could not find one, so they pronounced at that point in time.
When you go to that scene, you're looking for physical evidence that's going to corroborate a story or contradict a story. You already had a very detailed account on 911 of what the suspect said had occurred. So what you're trying to do is compare that story to the physical evidence and see if it matches or doesn't match. And that's what they were doing. The coroner would have been called. Anytime there's a body at a crime scene, we do have to call the coroner to take possession of it and process of it and remove it from the scene.
Immediately when I went in, I walked into a hallway, and straight through the hallway would have been the living room. Immediate right would have been a spare bedroom along with a bathroom. In the living room area, it was very cluttered.
Ryan was a bachelor. He lived alone. It was messy. It was cluttered, as most single 30-year-old bachelors would be, but it was orderly. Nothing was broken, nothing was out of place, nothing was knocked over. It was not what you would expect in the scene of some violent struggle that she had painted to 911.
We took the gun that was used, because she told us where the gun was, where she put it. The bullet casings on the ground, the spent casings on the ground, measurements of the apartment, IDs, just information at the time we thought was important.
I was actually born in Highland Heights. It is a small town community, and it's one of those communities where you kind of know everybody. And a lot of people that are born here stay here, and they raise their family here.
It's located in the center of Campbell County, about 7,000 residents, usually a quiet town. It's a nice little community.
Place that everybody in America would be happy to live at. I could live there in the blink of an eye. It's a very comfortable place. It's a trusting place. You trust your neighbors. You trust the police.
In fact, most people that live here because they feel relatively safe in our community, and we have an amazing police department that ensures their safety.
You don't ever hear of corruption, or you don't hear of any of that negative things that you hear in the news a lot. That doesn't exist in Highland Heights. I'd love it if my parents would move there and retire, because I would feel safe knowing they were safe. Criminal defense, that's what I do for a living. And when I think back at the number of cases that I have out of Highland Heights, it's almost non-existent. Other than the one that we're here for, that we're talking about, I can't think of any crime that comes out of Highland Heights.
Later that night, after being arrested at the crime scene, Shayna Hubers is brought to the police station for questioning, and her behavior doesn't go unnoticed.
Shayna was taken straight from the scene to the Highland Heights Police Department. According to the individual who transported her, a local police officer, she talked the entire way there. Again, we're only talking a couple minutes, it's right down the road, but this girl who was just taken out of this scene talked the entire time. When they arrived, they placed her in the interview room. She wasn't aware that she was being recorded. No one informed her of that. And when they placed her in the room, she was crying. And the moment the door shut and she was alone, she stopped instantly. Began looking at her nails, began checking her clothes, began fidgeting.
I'll get you a cigarette too. I'm in just a second, you're fine. And after I asked her the basic questions, who she was and who that person was that was lying on the floor, she told me his name and that he lived there, and I asked her if she lived there, and she said no. Asked her some other information, and then she started talking and just kind of like interviewed me at that point.
Officers came in and out, and you could see on this video the performance. If someone was in the room, it was theatrics, it was tears, it was blubbering, it was hysteria. If she was alone, it was calm and quiet. She would dance, she would sing, she would laugh, and she could not stop talking.
She thought she was smarter than everybody else, but she kept changing her story in a way to where, you know, he was grabbed by the throat and thrown around, to where he was very abusive in the past. You know, it was just a lot of things that were inconsistent that you don't usually get when you're dealing with domestic violence, murder, or shooting or something like it. It just didn't fit that profile.
It was all that she tried to appear like a victim. She tried to appear how afraid she was. She tried to put on this face that wasn't true. So all the things that she said, the singing, the dancing, the bouncing off the walls in the interview when nobody was there, that was who she truly was. She just didn't realize the rest of the world was going to see that.
Early into being placed in that room, she invoked her Miranda rights, meaning police could not question her any further. She was not asked another question, and yet she proceeded to talk for 3 hours. She would ask for someone else. When somebody wasn't responding to her, wasn't engaged with her, she would ask for someone who would. She even asked, "Can I talk to you?" And she proceeded for 3 hours, desperate to tell her story.
Can I talk to you? Can I have somebody to talk to? Did you hear any of the story?
As we were listening to her talk, there were moments where we stopped and just had to question whether or not we really heard the words she said. One of the most important was when she said that Ryan was very vain. and he would not want to be deformed.
And she said, I shot him right here. I gave him his nose job that he wanted.
I shot him right here. I gave him his nose job he wanted.
I can remember looking to Chief Birkenhauer and saying, did she really just say that?
Shayna made a comment in the interview room that people probably wouldn't want to marry her now, knowing that she'd killed her boyfriend in self-defense.
I don't know if anyone will ever want to marry me if they know that I killed a boyfriend in self-defense.
That's what her concern was. As Ryan was laying there with the crime scene unit taking pictures of his dead body, she was wondering if anybody else would want to marry her.
At some point in time, when the officers left her alone for a short time, she would start singing Amazing Grace.
How sweet the sound that sings.
Shayna Hubers was certainly different, depending on who was in the room. When we had a female officer in that room, she talked like they were great friends.
You have very pretty teeth.
But when there was a male officer in that room, suddenly we could see her demeanor change. She started acting more meek and mild. She, blinked her eyelashes a lot at them, trying to get them to see things in a different way. She really thought that she could win them over. Each male that was in that room with her, it just didn't work.
The behavior in that room was not like anything you ever see in an interrogation room. She was strutting, she was snapping her fingers and chanting, I did it, I did it, I did it.
I did. Yes, I did. I can't believe I did that.
She even muttered under her breath at one point when alone in the room, I'm so good at acting, and laughed. To see somebody who had just murdered any individual, much less somebody they supposedly cared about, and dance and sing and celebrate, it was the most cold, depraved behavior I've ever seen in my career as a prosecutor.
So when I watched all those things she did when nobody was supposedly looking, I knew she was in trouble. She just showed her true character right there. She wasn't broken up inside. She wasn't scared. She wasn't any of that. She was thinking she was about to walk out of there and get away with it. And I knew she should be done for. The walls of fate were closing in on her.
On October 12, 2012, Ryan Poston, an attorney from Kentucky, is shot 6 times in his Highland Heights condominium by his on-and-off girlfriend Shayna Hubers. It is Hubers who calls 911 to report that she has killed Ryan, but insists that the killing is an act of self-defense.
So the following day, with the shooting happening the night of the 12th, the body would have been taken to autopsy. And at the autopsy, the medical examiner's job is from a scientific perspective to explain what happened to this individual. Clearly, we knew this was a case involving gunshots, but the medical examiner's job is to explain to us what those gunshots did to Ryan Poston that ultimately resulted in his death.
They'll look at different things. We'll get the clothes from the autopsy from Mr. Poston's body. We brought that back because we wanted to do some forensic testing on that as far as firearms. When someone is shot, there is some stempling if it's close range. And then we'll have entry wounds and how many there were, damage to the body as well. So we'll have other information from that.
Some bullets passed through, some bullets remained in him. They did remove a number of projectiles and fragments from inside his body. To be blunt, these shots tore him apart. They entered his body and they perforated vital organs. They traveled throughout. A number of them exited. They wreaked absolute havoc on the inside of Ryan's body.
Following the autopsy report, the death of Ryan is ruled a homicide.
Ryan was a very smart guy from a great family. Ryan had 3 parents, a father, a stepfather, and a mother who cared deeply about him. He had 3 younger sisters that he was very protective of. He came from a large extended family of aunts, uncles, cousins.
Family was very important to him. He was very important to family.
Very, very close-knit upbringing. He had lived all over the world. He moved around with his stepfather's job to different places throughout Europe and Asia, and ultimately came back to America to attend college and came back to Northern Kentucky, where he graduated from law school. And he had set up his private practice here in Cincinnati, and that's what he was currently doing, was trying to get that law practice off the ground.
Ryan was a law clerk for an attorney that was in my building on my floor. And we'd see each other. It'd be 9, 10 o'clock at night, and we'd pass each other, and just two single guys talking, and just clicked very, very well. But I remember the first time we went out, it was after work. We were bored, wanted to grab something to eat or something, and we'd go down the street, and women were all over him. And I thought, wow, this guy obviously has something about him. I just knew Ryan as a friend. I didn't understand him to be this really good-looking individual or anything else, because he was just my buddy. Women would come up to him and talk to him, and he wouldn't even have to go to them, but yet he was always nice to them. Women noticed Ryan, I guess is the best way to do it. He didn't exploit that at all. The guy was really a gentleman. Really a gentleman. Never degraded women, was kind, polite, all the time. It was the biggest funeral I've ever seen. I didn't know how a person could even know that many people.
There was an amazing turnout. People wanting to share their stories about Ryan, share their love for Ryan.
And I had no idea there were this many people connected to Ryan. I seemed to be connected to the world. I mean, it was amazing, and everybody loved Ryan kind of the way I did. He was such an easy guy to talk to.
Shayna grew up far more modest than Ryan. She was the daughter of a public school teacher and a carpenter. Shayna was an only child. Her parents were older, and there is no doubt that Shayna was everything to her parents. Her entire life, Shayna was told she was special, that she was different, that things didn't apply to her. That's how her parents raised her. So she grew up believing that.
Ryan is 28 and Shayna Hubers is 20 when they meet in 2011. During their romance, Hubers is a psychology student at the University of Kentucky, about 80 miles from Highland Heights.
How does anybody meet nowadays? They met on the internet. Through a mutual friend, Ryan saw a picture of Shayna. He thought she was attractive, and he added her on Facebook, and they began communicating. And just like that, the ball started rolling towards his fate.
Both very intelligent. That's something he was interested in. Somebody who could match his level of intelligence, somebody who would engage in conversations about important things, and those were some of the reasons why he might have initially sought out Shayna Hubers and was attracted to her. Ryan's family told us that his relationship with Shayna was strained at all times, and that she was the biggest source of stress for him. He could not get rid of her. It was like that little gnat that you can't ever swat. She was just always there.
I could tell that, she was a little bit clingy, but what he kept telling me was he would break up with her, but she just wouldn't take no for an answer. And I honestly kind of faulted Ryan at this. What do you mean she doesn't take no? It didn't make any sense to me what he was saying. It's like, tell her you're done, over with, move on. I mean, common sense things at that time. I didn't understand how this was not breaking up. Well, I ended up figuring it out once I personally saw some crazy things that she was doing. Like, he would come to me and said, I finally broke up with her, it's over with. And then a half hour later, she's walking down my hallway all made up and bouncing. Oh, hi, Adam. I barely knew the girl at all. We met, he introduced us, because again, he's nice and polite. And all of a sudden, she's just walking down my hallway, and what are you doing here? It was that weirdness. And then it kept amplifying. The weirdness kept amplifying.
There were people in his life that were concerned about Shayna Hubers. She would randomly show up walking in downtown Cincinnati. I remember somebody described it as dressed to the nines in the middle of the day when she knew Ryan was going out to lunch. And they would just randomly meet on the streets. She lives in Lexington, Kentucky. She lived about an hour and a half from there. What was she doing in downtown Cincinnati? She would create these chance meetings with Ryan. She made up some big story about her aunt dying in Hawaii, and she was going to leave her $2 million, but she needed legal help. That was another way to get back involved with Ryan. Because as a young attorney, of course Ryan's going to take a case. She would do anything she could to try to find a way to stay in Ryan's life.
She just simply wouldn't go away, and I was really getting concerned. Now, when I say really getting concerned, I'm not thinking anything awful had happened, I just thought, she's going to be a problem.
Shayna explained it as though they had been in this long-term, permanent, committed relationship, but that wasn't reality. She acted as though that they had met several years prior and remained together, and that he had treated her poorly throughout this time, and that she had endured all this mistreatment, and that on this particular night, in the course of him asking her to leave, they got into this fight that escalated to his murder.
On the night of his murder, Ryan was getting ready for a first date with a new girl he'd recently met, a new girl who was most definitely not Shayna Hubers.
Ryan was supposed to meet Audrey Bolte. They were going to be meeting at a local establishment in Milford, Ohio, which is close to where she lived. They were going to have a couple of drinks and get to know each other. They had been communicating on social media, and this was the first time that they were going to meet in person.
Audrey Bolte had formerly been Miss Ohio. There were a lot of pictures out there of her on the internet, including one particular picture of her in this large yellow evening gown. It was that file that was in a saved carved image on Shayna's phone that she had been looking at that morning.
So Shayna Hubers would access Ryan Poston's Facebook all the time. It was well known that she knew his password. She would block certain girls when they asked to be friends with Ryan. If she was jealous of somebody on social media, she got into Ryan's account and she blocked them. So here's what's interesting about Audrey, is that Ryan and Audrey had been talking. They had been making their plans to meet up on October 12th, the day that Ryan was murdered. Shayna Hubers also became friends with Audrey Bolte on Facebook. Shayna Hubers had Audrey Bolte's Miss Ohio photo in her computer. She knew what was happening. And Ryan was not going to choose somebody else over her. She was going to make sure of that.
Because she knew he had those plans that night, she was trying desperately to stick around. She was finding any reason to be in Cincinnati. She was finding any reason to be with him, and he kept telling her, I need space. I need to be alone this weekend. I have plans. You're not included. Telling her to go away. She wouldn't. He went to work that day, and he told them what his plans were. He told them, I've got everything off my back, now I got to deal with Shayna. The only reason Ryan went home is his plans changed. He was supposed to meet Audrey Bolte right after work. Audrey Bolte had to attend the funeral for somebody she knew, so she asked if they could bump it back a few hours.
But Ryan didn't care. It was fine. He was going to be able to meet her later. However, that delay is what kept Ryan in his condominium. And that's what allowed Shayna Hubers to confront him one last time.
If Ryan had not gone home after work, who knows? Shayna probably still would have gotten to him somehow, but instead he went home, Shayna showed up there, and an hour later, 911 was called.
Following Ryan's murder, his on and off girlfriend Shayna Hubers is arrested and brought in for questioning. Despite asking for an attorney, Hubers continues to talk at length about what she has done, claiming she shot and killed Ryan in self-defense.
I don't have any serious injuries that I could have had, and I shot him in self-defense.
However, as they review the evidence at hand, investigators believe this was a murder fueled by pure envy.
The evidence collected from the apartment, the important things were clearly where he had been shot. He was seated in a chair at a table. That could be shown from his blood pattern, it could be shown from the position of his body, and it automatically dispelled this violent struggle of him chasing her around the room that she had painted for law enforcement. The shell casings were important. The shell casings, the grouping of them, showed that she had stood there the entire time and traveled around the table to access him better. The shots identified by the crime scene reconstructionists as being the first shots didn't have that stippling and those powder burns, but the subsequent one did, which means she got closer as she was shooting. She wasn't backing away from him, she was getting further on top of him. Those were the really important things to be taken from the scene. Ryan was going out with Audrey Bolte. She was a beautiful girl, and they'd agreed to meet up that night. Shayna knew. There were pictures on her phone of Audrey Bolte. So while Ryan is asleep in bed, in the middle of the night, she, on her phone, is looking at pictures of Audrey Bolte.
After the interrogation, Shayna Hubers is put into custody.
After being in the police department for a little over 2.5 hours, Sergeant Fornash came in and told her she was being charged with murder.
Shayna was very calm when she went into custody. When she was told she was being charged with murder, her first question was, what degree?
There's no degree. It's murder, and then we took her into custody and they transported her down to the jail.
We don't have degrees in the state of Kentucky. And that was essentially it. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She didn't show a lot of outrage. She didn't show a lot of emotion. So when she went into custody, it was probably the calmest she had been the entire 3-hour interaction.
On January 16th, 2013, in the case of Ryan Poston's murder, Shayna Hubers enters a plea of not guilty. The trial begins.
So Shayna's trial, her first trial, began in April of 2015. And that would have been the first time that her case was brought before a jury.
There was a packed courtroom. Ryan's friends and family were all there, and they're counting on us to bring in a guilty verdict. But more importantly than that, knowing how much Ryan loved the law and he loved the idea of justice, we felt the weight of that. It was our job to get the justice that Ryan loved so much, to make sure that for him, the justice was served.
Prosecutors argue that the motive for the murder is that Ryan wanted to permanently end his relationship with Hubers. Defense attorneys continue with their contention that the shooting is an act of self-defense and that Hubers is a victim of domestic abuse.
So on the first trial, the argument was that this was self-defense, that Ryan was the one that was attacking Shayna. And again, we go back to our crime scene reconstructionist. There is no physical evidence that shows that Ryan was attacking Shayna. She went forward, not backward. And that is not what someone who defends themselves does. That is what someone who is a predator does. She preyed on Ryan even in his injured state. After the first few shots, she kept going. She watched him as he made noises, and she lifted the gun and fired again.
Nothing happened to that girl. There was no violent struggle. There was no being tossed around. There was nothing of the sort. What you had was a man sitting down, telling her it was over, begging her to leave.
She was not thrown around that room. There was no evidence of it. And there would have been evidence. Keep in mind, Ryan is a bachelor. This is a bachelor pad. He's certainly not dusting once a week. So if anything would have been disturbed, we would have seen it. Shayna made a mention that she was thrown into the television. But when we showed up at the condominium, the television had not been moved. And we know it because there was so much dust that any bit of movement would have shown in that dust. She also made a mention that Ryan threw her into the bookcase. There were things on that bookcase that any tiny bit of pressure would have knocked over. Ryan had some antique ammunition sitting on its end. They were not pushed down. Ryan had pipes that were his grandfather's that were standing in a stand. Any movement toward that would have knocked them over if anyone was thrown into it. There was nothing. There was nothing that was done.
We had a cold-blooded, calculated murderer on our hands who was exploiting domestic violence, exploiting self-defense, trying to take the credibility away from the millions of other women in this world who live in domestic violence relationships because she wanted to kill someone.
Shayna trying to justify in some crazy, psychotic way a horrible act that she did to a wonderful person.
Shayna Hubers lived her life through her social media or through her text messages. We literally got a calendar for the last year and a half of her life, and we could tell you where she was and what she was doing. But most importantly, we could tell you what she was thinking. Because remember, as prosecutors, we have to prove that she intentionally killed Ryan Poston. That's a hard thing, is to get into the mindset of another person. But with Shayna, she just opened the door for us. She gave us direct insight into what she was thinking and what she was doing just about every minute of the day.
Through the text messages, the prosecutors are able to showcase the extreme level of obsession Shayna Hubers has towards Ryan during their relationship. In one instance, after Ryan tries once again to break up with her, Hubers poses as a potential client seeking legal advice, just to get in touch with him through texting, hoping for any small bit of acknowledgement.
There were most definitely times that the glimpse into her phone, the glimpse into her mind, shocked the jury. There were times when you could see the puzzled look on their face where they just couldn't believe what they were seeing.
Despite the fact that Ryan wants nothing to do with Hubers at this point, a relative of Ryan's testifies at the trial that Ryan had texted claiming that Hubers was going so far as to break into his home. Although Shayna Hubers is imprisoned during the years leading up to her trial, she spends a lot of that time speaking with her fellow inmates.
As you figured out by now, Shayna can't help herself from talking. She actually cannot restrain herself from it. So you can imagine sitting in jail all those days, she had to talk about herself, had to talk about the case, and she talked a lot. She really grew to trust these girls. She told them things about her case, about their relationship, that ultimately became very, very important. She opened up to them about the fact that she was lying, that he didn't abuse her, that he wasn't abusive towards her, that it was her, that she had killed him out of jealousy. She told them that, and they came forward and told us those things.
They told us everything that she planned to do at trial. And one of the things that she wanted to do was to plead insanity. But she knew that that wouldn't fly because she's so smart and she has the IQ of Einstein. Again, remember, this is a narcissist we're talking about. Thinks she's smarter than everyone in any room she is in. And she thought that she was smarter than us. She thought she was smarter than the judge, but most importantly, she thought she was smarter than our jury. And that ultimately was her downfall.
The first trial was guilty. They sentenced her to 40 years. The 40 years, I wish it would have been more. It was a start for the family to be able to, feel like justice had been served.
The presiding judge does not view Shayna Hubers as a victim of domestic violence and even considers a sentence longer than 40 years.
Yes, I was happy with the verdict, a lot of it because at least it was conclusion. What bothered me is after 20 years, even with a 40-year verdict, after 20 years I knew she would be eligible for parole and I knew that she had a decent chance of getting it.
Following the 2012 shooting of Ryan, his on and off girlfriend Shayna Hubers is found guilty of his murder and sentenced to 40 years in prison. She is eligible to apply for parole after 20 years of her sentence. However, a new challenge in this case is about to emerge.
Ryan's family, what they felt after that first verdict was a sense of justice for Ryan. They felt like they could finally start with healing, but that was short-lived.
There was an issue where the juror on that trial had a prior felony conviction for failing to pay child support. In the state of Kentucky, getting a certain amount behind on your child support can be a felony charge.
Under Kentucky law, if you are convicted of a felony, you are not able to serve as a juror. So we knew at that point in time that the judge was going to have no choice but to set aside the verdict.
With the 2015 verdict being set aside, Shayna Hubers' guilty verdict is overturned, and in August 2018, she is tried for Ryan's murder for the second time.
What we were most afraid of was relaying this information to the family, because we fought so hard for them. We fought hard for Ryan, and we knew we would do it again, but it was just the fact that we had to do it a second time in a very tearful phone call. The hardest call that I've ever had to make. But what I will say about Ryan's family, they immediately said, okay, what do we have to do?
First thing they have to contend with is the fact that she could actually walk away from this. And that was horrible in and of itself. Not only not have closure, but then the wound is opened up again, fresh as ever.
They were so supportive of us and the job that we had. They were patient when we told them it was going to take a long time, and they never lost faith, knowing that we would do what was right for Ryan. And even this setback that to us felt like it was the worst news we could possibly get, they were just right on board again and said, let's do it again.
August 8th, 2018, was the day to deliver opening statements. Your opening statement at a murder trial is your opportunity to tell the jury why they should listen to you, why your case is the one that has credibility, why you're going to be the ones in the courtroom speaking the truth. We had to offer them enough to let them know that the only dangerous person in this relationship was her, that the only abusive person in this relationship was her, that the only violent person in this relationship was her. Here they see this young, tiny woman, well-dressed, sitting at that table, and you have to let them know not to be fooled by her appearance, that the person sitting across from them can in fact be a monster.
We wanted the jury to remember this. Ryan was only going to leave that condominium either as Shayna Hubers' boyfriend or in a body bag. For the second trial, we had a new witness who said she didn't even realize that the first trial had happened, but when she heard about it, she connected the dots, and she said, that was the girl that was at my counter. So earlier in the day, around dinner time, on the day that Ryan Poston was murdered, Shayna Hubers goes to the Dillards at the local mall and is talking to people there. And she made multiple statements saying that her boyfriend had broken up with her and was going to go out with another girl and she was going to kill him. She said it over and over again. At the time, of course, like other people, you don't put any truth into those statements until you hear that within just a few hours after those statements were made, her boyfriend was killed by her. We knew that there was no way that she was going to go through a second trial without taking that stand. She's a narcissist. Her own doctor tells us. It was really hard for her not to testify in the first trial. There was no way she was not going to take that stand in the second trial.
We had no idea what to expect and what we were going to need, because when somebody like Shayna is going to take the stand, which you have to prepare for that possibility, you don't know what they're going to say. She has no qualms about lying, and we know that about her.
So we approached everything from being able to refute her testimony. No matter what Shayna said, we were going to be able to refute it.
Ryan's sister, she is an absolute warrior of a person, and when she took that stand in the second trial, she had a teddy bear with her. She had brought it for a reason, and when she pressed the paw, it played Ryan's voicemail. And she explained to the jury that that was all they had left, a teddy bear with Ryan's voice inside.
We had to let Ryan's voice be heard. And that's exactly what Ryan's sister did. To see a family who has nothing left other than a voice coming out of a teddy bear. We're not just talking about Ryan losing his life. We are talking about every one of his family and friends who will never be the same. We have to talk about the empty table at every Christmas dinner and every Thanksgiving and every birthday. We have to talk about the lost children that Ryan could have had. This is more than just Ryan's life that was impacted.
She took the witness stand, and she did her best to account for some of her erratic behavior from that horrible police interrogation.
I shot him twice, thought he was completely dead and he was laying there still, and I shot him in the head.
I talked a lot about Shayna Hubers being jealous, but I remember starting the closing with Shayna's own words, because no matter what words come out of my mouth, nothing was as impactful as what came out of Shayna's mouth. I did it. Yep, I did it.
I did. Yes, I did. I believe I did that.
Can I say anything that's more powerful than that? Or that she gave him the nose job he wanted.
One of our last conversations we had that was good was that he wants my best friend who's a dentist to do his veneers and wants to get a nose job. And I shot him right here. I gave him his nose job.
Shayna talked a lot about a lot of things that didn't have anything to do with Ryan's murder. She tried to portray herself as a victim.
She took it as an opportunity to paint this as a relationship where he was sex obsessed, that he tried to make their relationship all about sex, but that wasn't what the evidence supported. The text messages were there, where Ryan was telling her it wasn't that important to him. where Ryan was telling her it's not that big of a deal, where she was saying, why don't you show interest in me? Why don't you have sexual desire for me? So the text messages told a different story than what she told on the stand.
So she tried to create this reality that just didn't exist and tried to make herself look sympathetic when in reality, all she did was make herself look like a liar. She lied to her attorneys. She lied to Ryan. At that point in time, I don't know if there was anybody she didn't lie to. And having a defendant acknowledge on the stand that even the people that are on her team that she lied to is so hard to overcome. Because, of course, who else would she have lied to? The jury.
After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury comes to a verdict.
On August 23rd, 2018, there was a guilty verdict. Shayna was sentenced to life in prison.
4 little letters. L-I-F-E, life. The level of commitment to this case over the years, 6, 7 years, is something that I've never seen before. Me and my co-workers, everybody at the police department, and most importantly, Ryan's family and friends. Nobody gave up. It would have been real easy to do that after the first verdict was set aside, but we tried to see it as the gift that we wanted, a second shot at life.
Obsession, jealousy, I'm not sure the word, but the fixation she had on him, again, looking back, I thought he had it under control, and now it's obvious.
Shayna was hands down the most obsessively jealous person I have ever met. It consumes her to where she could think of nothing else but Ryan, where he was at, who he was with, what he was doing, why not with her. The jealousy that she felt, the need to have him, absolutely consumed her. I think of Ryan all the time. I think of Ryan when I drive past the apartment complex. I think of Ryan when I hear certain songs on the radio for someone that I didn't know, but yet feel like I know so well through the glimpse into their world, through his phone, through his computer, through his Facebook. Somebody I feel like I had conversations with because I've read everything that went on in his life for so many years. I think of him far too often.
Ryan was the ultimate gentleman. While I was his senior, I actually looked up to him. Kind to everybody. He never spoke down to people. He didn't treat people bad. Even when he was treated poorly by somebody, he would take the upper road. I still feel the void. There's never going to be anybody like Ryan.
On March 22nd, 2018, police receive a call informing them that a farmer in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, has reported the arrival of a distressed young woman named Ezra McCandless at his doorstep.
I'm calling 911. What's the address of the emergency?
This is Don Sipple calling, and I have a young lady that just came to my house, and somebody attacked her, and she needs a doctor. Her clothes are all torn.
She was covered in mud up to her knees. She had blood on her clothing. She was very distraught, seemed rather confused.
It wasn't until later on, when she was able to take a shower at the hospital, that some of her memories seemed to come back to her, and that's when she told investigators that she was attacked by Alex Woodworth.
Alex Woodworth is a local substitute teacher, but when police attempt to locate him, they draw a blank.
We couldn't find him, so we decided to go out there and talk to Don Sipple and see if there was anything else that we could learn. And as I was standing on the roadway, I noticed footprints in the mud.
Detectives follow the footprints and come to an abandoned vehicle stuck in the mud. It belongs to Ezra McCandless, and slumped in the footwell of her car is the lifeless body of Alex Woodworth.
You've got a victim stabbed 16 times. This would have absolutely been a textbook case of rage killing.
I think what happened was premeditated.
This was an attack that he didn't see coming.
An ex-boyfriend of Ezra McCandless comes forward. His name is Jason Mengel.
At the same time that came about, Jason Mengel came to the police department. He mentioned that earlier in the day, he went to Racy's coffee shop, and while he was there, as he described it, she burst through the door, said that she had a crazy look in her eyes.
We started to learn that there was a love triangle between Alex, Jason Mengel, and Ezra.
Ultimately, Ezra wanted to be with was Jason.
She needed to try and cut Alex out of the mix, and she got wrapped up in her own mind and did a horrible thing.
But Ezra McCandless is claiming self-defense. Is it even possible that she could be consumed by jealousy to the point of murder?
I think a scorned woman is definitely capable of committing some of the worst crimes there are.
Eau Claire, Wisconsin, the area is buzzing with creativity, full of trendy bars, and a community of creatives who gather at Racy Delane's Coffee Lounge.
Eau Claire's been described as being a big little town, meaning in a sense it's pretty big geographically, but the people who live there all seem to know each other, and it seems to be a pretty nice place to live and build a community.
Eau Claire is a college town, so there is a younger demographic here, but there's also a lot of young families because people do come here for the college, love the community, and they'll stay here and they'll raise their families. So it's a very family-oriented place. Racy's is a coffee shop that is near campus. It's near the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. I like to equate it as almost like a central perk from the show Friends. It's that cozy, that little bit of artsy, little bit of alternative, that kind of vibe. So it's a very, very welcoming, open coffee shop.
In March 2018, around 4:15 p.m., a young woman named Ezra McCandless arrives at the doorstep of dairy farmer Don Sipple in the rural area of Springbrook, Eau Claire.
At the time, when Ezra pounded on his front door, he was eating dinner. And when he opens the door, Ezra was standing there claiming to have been attacked.
County 911, what's the address of the emergency?
This is Don Sipple calling, and I have a young lady that just came to my house, and somebody attacked her, and she needs a doctor. Her clothes are all torn, and...
Okay, and she's by herself?
She's by herself. She walked to my house here just recently.
She was extremely upset. She was covered in bruises. She had some blood, particularly around her mouth. And when Don Sipple was just trying to get some basic information from her, she really couldn't remember anything that had happened to her. She didn't know who attacked her. She just kept saying she's hurting everywhere and she needed help.
She gets transferred to Mayo Hospital here in Eau Claire. Officer Corey Reeves goes and talks to her, and then Ezra's admitted into the hospital for her safety and to make sure she's okay from this traumatic incident.
I went to the hospital to speak with Deputy Shields and to help interview Ezra in her emergency room. And she provided the name Monica Carlin to Deputy Shields, so there was some issues trying to get an actual identification on her. Monica Carlin was her name before, and then she had it legally changed to Ezra McCandless.
Not only is there confusion over Ezra McCandless's name, but detectives also discover she has had a challenging childhood.
She's a 19-year-old teenage girl that dropped out of college who ended up in Eau Claire because life sort of drifted her there. She was born to a teen mom. Her mom was just 14 years old when she got pregnant and gave birth to Ezra. So that's, from the beginning, just a really hard way to grow up and to start your life. So the struggles early on were definitely were definitely there for Ezra being born to such a young mother. And it sort of seemed to want to start somewhere fresh in life and really create her own identity. Ezra was a very artistic person. She enjoyed the creative side to herself, and she even used her own car, a Chevy Impala, to be sort of her canvas.
Sergeant Corey Reeves conducts an interview with Ezra McCandless.
She was curled up in a hospital bed. She had the blanket pulled up to her face. Really, the only part of her that I could see was her nose and her eyes, and she was essentially in the fetal position on the bed until I came in and tried to talk to her. At that point, she sat up on the bed. She started rocking back and forth. She still had the blankets up by her mouth. She repeated several times, "It was dark and scary." She didn't have a great memory about what had happened or where she was that day.
She was crying but didn't see any tears. There were cuts in her pants to where you could see cuts into her body, into her flesh. The words boy were carved in her arm. And she had first said that Alex Woodworth was the one who did it.
She said she was sitting in the passenger seat. Alex was sitting in the driver's seat, and he reached over, held her arm down, and took out a knife, and then carved the word boy into her arm. And she said that's what he referred to me as his boy.
This turned out to be very significant to the story and to the investigation, because come to find out that when Ezra was younger, when she was in high school, she experienced a lot of gender identity issues. She struggled with thinking whether she was a male or she was a female, and she really struggled with how not only she identified herself, but also how she wanted other people to identify her. So having the word boy carved into her arm was really sort of significant of the gender issues that she experienced younger in her life.
Boy was written from starting at the elbow was the letter B, and down to the wrist was the Y. And it was written as if it was done with the right hand. If Alex would have done it, it would have been completely backwards. It would have been, the B would have been at the wrist, and the Y would have been up at the elbow. So that didn't make sense.
Ezra requests that her ex-boyfriend, Jason Mengel, come to the hospital. Detectives then interview Mengel at the police department.
Jason mentioned that he was in the military, that he was deployed fairly often for training. He talked about his relationship with Ezra a little bit. He was 33 years old, she was 19 years old. They dated on and off again for 9 months. He said that they would refer to each other as husband and wife, even though they weren't actually married. More recently, he'd been deployed, and Ezra told him that she no longer wanted to be with him. He said he was sad about this, but that they continued to communicate with each other. He learned that she started seeing Alex. He knew that she dated him before, and he mentioned that earlier in the day he went to Racy's coffee shop, and while he was there, as he described it, she burst through the door, said that she had a crazy look in her eyes. He tried to talk to her. She basically just shrugged him off. I believe she wanted to meet with Alex to talk to him. She wanted to get a hat back from his apartment, and then was out the door.
Jason decided to ride his bicycle to Alex's house. And that's when he saw Ezra's car parked out front and started sort of pacing back and forth in front of Alex's house, waiting for Ezra or Alex to come outside. And after about 45 minutes of waiting, he decided to go into Alex's house himself to make sure everything was okay, because his conversation and interaction with Ezra was just seemed off earlier that day. Now, according to Jason, they were deep in conversation, seemed okay, maybe an intense conversation. So Jason decided to go back outside, where he was confronted with the police.
Somebody else called in a suspicion complaint on Jason standing there watching from a distance. Eau Claire Police Department arrived. Jason explained to them why he was there and what he was doing, and that he was concerned because Ezra was kind of not in the right state of mind.
I was paranoid because she had like fire in her eyes.
Okay.
So
Who's the girlfriend?
Ezra McCandless.
Okay.
I was just worried because
was the door standing open over there when you got there on the car?
I knocked like 3 times. I didn't hear anything. I didn't hear a scuffle or anything. So knocked, yelled, opened the door, and I heard her say, "Let him help you. Let him help you." So then I said, "Hey, is everything okay? Is everyone all right now?" I mean, I'm a medic in the military, so I was paranoid. I was paranoid that someone was going to do something irrational.
Okay. And they're in the house on the corner here, or?
Yeah, they're on. I think they're fine though. I mean, I don't know. I'm just.
I just saw the door to the car was standing open too.
Yeah, I wanted to turn her car off. Her car was running, so that's why I was worried because it was running, and I was like, okay, what's going on? What's going on? Is everything okay?
Okay.
I don't think he's dangerous, but I don't know.
Do you know what his name is?
Alex Woodsworth.
Okay.
I think it's Woodsworth or Woodsworth.
Eventually, Eau Claire Police Department goes across the street and talks to Ezra and Alex and kind of finds out what's going on. They kind of blow it off, and they get in their vehicle, Ezra's vehicle, and leave. And Jason's kind of left he actually has a conversation with them before they leave. I think Jason truly had a concern, what Ezra was up to that day.
But the burning question remains, with Ezra McCandless continuing to claim assault. Where is Alex Woodsworth? In 2018, Ezra McCandless arrives at a rural farm in Wisconsin, Eau Claire. Covered in blood, she is disoriented and unable to recall the details of her ordeal, but asserts that she was assaulted by her partner, Alex Woodworth. McCandless's ex-boyfriend Jason informs detectives that he had seen Alex earlier that day and that he and Alex had spoken. Detectives are currently unaware of Alex Woodworth's whereabouts and are actively working to locate him.
I remember sitting in our conference room and we were saying to each other, well, where is Alex in this? Because police officers had contact with Alex, and we're starting to get concerned because she's in a condition that will lead us to believe that it's possible that something happened, and we can't find Alex. We started doing our work by contacting family. I remember calling Alex's mom. He's checked out all the locations where he might be. According to his mom, I think one was the coffee shop, Racy Delaney's. Another one was the Joint, which is a tavern. And then the other one was his house on Cameron Street.
I went to Alex's house on Cameron Street in Eau Claire. He wasn't there. His roommate was there. His roommate didn't know where he was. His roommate tried calling Alex. Alex's phone went straight to voicemail. After that, we basically ran out of leads.
During the course of the investigation and interviewing people about Alex, everyone we talked to said he was a gentle person. He cared for Ezra. He loved Ezra. He, according to people, never in a fight, never harm anybody, willing to help everybody, loved everybody. If he was going to fight, it was going to be with words. He was going to school to become a philosopher and teach philosophy. That's what his dream was.
It wasn't until later that night that I went back to the police department and had a discussion with my commanding officer and expressed some concerns about Alex's whereabouts and the fact that we couldn't find Ezra's vehicle. Ezra remembered something about a frog statue. She mentioned Owen Park. Eau Claire has a statue tour where they rotate statues, part of a sculpture competition. And at that point, I remember that there was a frog statue in Owen Park. And she told me that she was at Owen Park sometime between 1 and 4 o'clock. I checked the cameras, and I never saw her vehicle or her enter or exit the park.
Unable to obtain a precise timeline from McCandless, the detectives decide to revisit Don Sippel's farm in Springbrook.
We kind of all determined that it's going to be worthwhile for us to head out to that farm, because if this girl's walking down a county road barefoot, covered in mud, possibly some blood on her, and in the condition that she was in, somebody probably saw her, even though it's a rural area and people drive up and down the roads there. So we were surprised that she had supposedly walked all the way up to this farmhouse and hadn't been seen by anybody. Our thoughts were she couldn't have come from very far, because if she had, there would have been other calls, this girl walking down the street. So we decided to go out there and talk to Don Sipple and kind of look around a little bit and see what, kind of get a lay of the land and see if there was anything else that we could learn. We knew what kind of car she had. We knew that her Chevy Impala was very distinctive. She had done a lot of artwork, I guess you could say, drawing on the vehicle. So it was very easy to identify. It's white, so it should stick out. As that's happening, I stayed down on the road, which was a pretty good distance from the house. I'd say maybe 100 yards. As I was sitting there, I got out of my vehicle. I was just bored because they were up doing the interview, and I wanted to look around and see if there was anything maybe in the ditches along the road that she might have dropped. As I was doing that, I could see a farm access road that went off to the south, off of the road that I was on. Springtime, so there's a lot of mud and water runoff. And as I was standing on the roadway, I noticed footprints in the mud. As I got closer and looked at them, I could see that the footprints were not shoe impressions. They were, clearly a barefoot or a socked foot. So I called Detective Prock, and as they were interviewing Mr. Sipple, and I just said, hey, I got some footprints here in the mud. I think we need to investigate this further. And they were close enough in distance to the Sipple house that it's entirely possible she made it from that road to his house without a car going by. So we thought that these are probably her footprints coming out of the woods. So I waited for the other detectives to come down. I had some binoculars in my detective vehicle, and we started making our way up the dirt road and kind of crested a hill, and we could see Ezra's vehicle. My binoculars, I could see that the vehicle was stuck in some mud, probably 100 yards, 200 yards away. And there's a bunch of stuff outside the vehicle, like just random things from your car that looked like they were kind of just strewn about on the ground around the vehicle. And I could see what appeared to be the upper torso of a human body sticking out the back driver's side open door of the vehicle.
They took video and photographs as they walked into the area where this vehicle was located. An old military type trailer that was parked back in there in this area. So this vehicle stuck in the mud, Chevy Impala, all painted very odd things on the outside of their vehicle. The painting on her vehicle was a bird riding a bicycle on the roof of her car that she apparently had painted herself.
The upper half of his body was hanging out the rear driver's side door. The lower half of his body was in the footwell of the rear driver's side. He was clearly deceased. Looked like he had a scarf around his neck. We also noticed that there was blood outside, and we could see that there's a bunch of items that were probably in the car scattered around.
There was a pillow laying there with like a fox, the face of a fox on it, and a muddy footprint on that pillow, a deer antler laying there next to the head of this victim, until we looked into it a little bit more, and obviously there was significantly more wounds than what a deer antler would cause, and a pair of boots laying there all bloody. Turned out they had blood on them, but and eventually find out those were Ezra McCandless's boots that were laying there in the middle of where this crime had taken place.
The victim is confirmed as 24-year-old Alex Woodworth, and his body is taken for an autopsy.
There was 16 different stab and slice wounds identified on him. We could identify, just from the initial photos, 3 different slices on his throat and multiple stab wounds, mostly on his left side and his rib cage, lower abdomen, right about his belt line. Most of his injuries were around his neck, his back, his sides, the groin, but nothing really on his forearms or on the palms of his hands, a defensive manner. He didn't put up a fight, is what it would tell us, that he was either attacked unsuspectingly, Me personally, if somebody's attacking me with a knife, they're going to have one heck of a fight on their hands. And it didn't appear that he probably defended himself very much.
Alex, unfortunately, would have been alive for probably a significant amount of time after the attack. The medical examiner later on determined that none of the stab wounds in and of themselves were fatal. So based on that evidence, he likely survived for a good amount of time. Again, we have the evidence of the scarf being wrapped around his neck, possibly as a way to try to stop the bleeding. And we know that his body was found half outside of the car. So was Ezra trying to put him back in the car? Was that his way of trying to escape and maybe try to get some help? But he definitely suffered. It wasn't a quick death.
Detectives move forward with a follow-up interview with McCandless, seeking to unravel the mystery behind the brutal killing. Is this 19-year-old woman an innocent victim, or is this story more sinister than it appears? In 2018, Ezra McCandless arrives at a rural Springbrook farm in Wisconsin, but is marked with the word boy superficially cut into her arm. Despite her claims of an attack by her lover Alex Woodworth, she is unable to recall the details.
March 24th of 2018, Dunn County asked that I assist with the interview of Ezra, mainly because I've already have rapport with her. I've talked to her at this time a handful of times about her previous cases. So I meet with her again at the hospital. We go into a conference room, and I have her sit by the door and tell her, you're free to leave at any time. We just need to talk about what happened. I'm trying to fill in the blanks. And so we sit and talk. And eventually I inform her that we have found Alex and her car. It was kind of shock. And so as we were talking, she started talking about how Alex came, and she was in the car got stuck, and Alex came from behind her, and Alex tried cutting her pants off, and that's where the cuts in her pants were from. And then she also said the same thing about the cuts on her shirt, that he was trying to cut her shirt off.
He kept trying to grab me in the back of the car, so I just started to defend myself as fast as I could.
You said you had the knife. Where were you cutting him?
I just was going anywhere and everywhere I could.
Okay.
He just kept grabbing me and grabbing me and grabbing me.
The reason she said that she stabbed him so much was to get him to stop, because she said he kept on attacking her, and so she needed to stab him to stop him, because that's what her dad told her to do. We were able to figure out the knife was actually given to her from her father, that she had it in her car for defense. And after the incident took place, the stabbing of Alex, she took the knife with her, and the knife was eventually found in the ditch away from the car. She talked about how she tried to grab the knife with the blade to get it from her, and that's where the cut on her hands came from. And then she said that as they were in the car, she was fighting with him. He ended up dropping the knife, and that's when she was able to get a hold of the knife, and she stabbed him. If it's a defensive wound, and even think about it, if you're going to grab a knife, it's not going to be just like a little grab. You're going to grab onto that, and if it's a sharp knife and if someone pulls it, it's going to cut your hand wide open. And hers were as if you took your nail and scratched it across your palm of your hand a couple times. They were very superficial, no stitches. Basically, they put Band-Aids on them. And these were all documented by the emergency room doctor. And he even called them self-inflicted. And they weren't traumatic, they weren't inflicted by somebody else. No one's going to sit there and let someone carve a word into them and not be moving their arm, fighting or that. The lines were too perfectly straight. So once I confronted her with that, she admitted that she carved the word boy into her arm. When we pressed it, she said, I just wanted to remember. And that was it.
He didn't do that to you, did he? You carved a boy into your own arm. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
This was a shock to the community. This was not something that anyone had really experienced or heard about. And especially as more of the details of the case started to become public, when you're talking about the age of the victim, when you're talking about the age of Ezra, this really was something that rocked this community. I don't think anyone wants to think that a 19-year-old small stature female is capable of something like this. I think as a society, we just don't want to think they're capable of that.
Upon confessing to detectives that she disposed of the murder weapon, investigators study the evidence at the crime scene and observe additional discrepancies in her initial account.
We eventually started to piece it together that her story's BS. It's not making sense, and based off from his injuries, the one that really sticks in my mind is the 3 distinct cut wounds across his throat. That's not self-defense. That's fully intentionally of killing somebody. Stabbing somebody in the groin, in the lower abdomen, in the left side, in the back. There was clear intent to kill somebody with those wounds. There's different theories. Did she try and get Alex after she stabbed him to death and slit his throat 3 times? Did she try and get him back into the car and try and get her car out of there to move the scene? Did he get in the car himself?
The biggest part of the investigation would have taken place right there in and around Ezra's car. Not just where Alex's body was discovered in the back seat, but also looking around the car. And I think during the course of the investigation, that's where they uncovered the most amount of evidence that seemed to contradict her story. For instance, finding the majority of Alex's blood outside of the car. Finding the blood outside of the car is pretty telling because Ezra's story was that they were interacting inside of the car, and that's where she claimed to have stabbed him in self-defense. Well, that's problematic because investigators found the majority of the amount of blood outside of the car. If she was telling the truth about her story, the blood should have been found inside the car.
There's a bloody footprint on the roof of the car at an angle that just doesn't make sense. So obviously we know that Alex didn't put the muddy footprint on the ceiling of the car. That had to have come from Ezra because her boots were off and her socks were muddy. So, did she try and drag Alex into the car to try and get the car moved and move the scene of the homicide so it wasn't discovered there? I think there was a significant time there that she really went, oh, what am I going to do now? He's dead in my car. I can't move my car. And I think there was, maybe up to several hours that she sat there trying to figure out how to spin this tale and causing injuries to herself to make it look like she was attacked, that she didn't want to jab herself or stab herself significantly to cause herself too many wounds, so really all of her injuries were superficial scratches. So I think she spent a significant amount of time there after Alex was dead.
She took Alex's cell phone with him. She didn't have a cell phone of her own. Now, when investigators asked her what happened to Alex's cell phone because it wasn't with him inside the car, she originally said that she took it so she could call for help. But that was discovered later on to not be true because the cell phone was found broken, and which Ezra later claimed she fell, and that's how Alex's cell phone eventually broke. But there's no evidence suggesting that Ezra ever used Alex's phone to try to get help. If Ezra would have just walked away, it would have absolutely been prevented. Or even after the attack, if she would have just used Alex's cell phone to dial 911 and even say that she made a mistake, he probably would have survived, and we wouldn't be talking about a murder.
But what is the underlying motive behind the murder of Alex?
We want to find out what led up to this, like what caused this incident to occur. Was this self-defense? Was there a fight that occurred? Was there any kind of motive that she might have had for this to happen? We interviewed family, friends of both Ezra and Alex, some of Alex's professors, Alex's friends and family, and we started to learn that there was a kind of like a love triangle between Alex, Jason Mengel, and Ezra. We started to paint a picture that, Ezra was struggling when you take all those things and put them together with the total picture here, to me, we were just dealing with a deeply disturbed woman who had an affinity for Jason Mengel to the point that she was willing to murder Alex Woodworth.
Ezra is someone that can pretty easily manipulate people. I think Ezra comes across as being this sweet, nice, artsy, creative young girl, but deep down, I don't really think that's who she is. But I think she's able to use that to manipulate people and to get people to like her and give her what she wants. But I think she can easily turn into a very different person when she's threatened. I don't think Ezra had it in her to ever walk away from this situation. I don't think she was ever willing to walk away from any of these relationships that she had with any of these people, because that would mean the attention was being taken away from her. And I don't think she's the type of person that's going to walk away from that.
All signs indicate that this was a surprise attack, driven by the desperation to control a love triangle gone wrong, with tragic consequences. In 2018, Ezra McCandless arrives at a rural Springbrook farm in Wisconsin, injured, bloodied, and bearing a superficial cut on her arm with the inscription "Boy." She claims that her lover, Alex Woodworth, restrained her and inflicted the injuries, but this statement is later proven false. Shortly thereafter, Alex Woodworth's lifeless body is found in the same area, with 16 stab wounds and no defensive injuries. This leads investigators to consider it an attack driven by a jealous desire to separate Alex from her relationship with Jason Mengel. Contrary to McCandless's version of events, the evidence discovered at the crime scene contradicts her narrative.
I think the impact of the local community was a little bit of shock because they were seen around the community. You know, they were at Racy's, they were at the Joint, they were at all of these places where the art community hung out, where a lot of people hung out. And so people had known them and recognized them. So I think the community seeing that was quite shocking. Obviously never know what's going on when, you know, a person's life next to you, but that all of this was going on, that was unsettling.
The Racy's community was thrilled. They wanted her gone. They wanted her away. That's a very tight-knit group of friends, community there, and they were in shock. They were saddened. Everyone loved Alex. They wanted Alex back, but unfortunately we couldn't do that. So the next best thing was her gone. They didn't want to see her ever again. And on April 6th, 2018, Ezra was arrested for first-degree intentional homicide. She was taken from the hospital and went to Dunn County Jail.
Detectives gather the evidence to prepare for trial.
She lawyered up. There wasn't much of an opportunity to talk to her much more other than her initial couple stories after she was confronted with finding her vehicle and Alex's body. Her family got an attorney involved right away and secured an attorney for her, and so there wasn't much of an opportunity to interview her anymore. The physical evidence kind of spoke for itself, but there also was a lot of questions about the physical evidence that we couldn't answer. You know, like, how did Alex end up in the car? You know, only Ezra knows that because Alex can't speak for himself anymore. You know, so I think we're pretty confident in our investigation going into this, not knowing exactly what Ezra's going to, what her defense attorney is going to claim at trial. But as an agency, I think we felt pretty comfortable. I think the DA, the prosecuting attorney, felt pretty comfortable going into this case with what we had. We had expert testimony lined up to show that these injuries to her were self-inflicted. It's a large, many pieces of a puzzle that you got to try and put together, present to the DA. The DA has to try and tell this story to a jury and convince them that what we have discovered through our investigation proves that she, you know, intentionally murdered him.
By October 2018, when the case went to trial and Ezra was charged with first-degree intentional murder, she surprisingly didn't show any remorse. I think she went into that trial still trying to play the victim in all of this, and she was determined to stick to her original story. It does not surprise me at all to find out that Ezra decided to take the stand in her own defense, although most criminal defendants choose not to. The reason why it doesn't surprise me is because, by all accounts, Ezra liked the attention. She liked to be the star. She liked to be the center of everyone's attention. And I think by taking the stand and being able to tell her story directly from her mouth, I think she really enjoyed that. And I think she also thought that it was going to be a way for her to continue on this narrative and continue the lies that she had laid into foundation. She pretty much stuck to her original version that this was self-defense, that Alex was the one who had come on to her, that he had physically gotten on top of her, that he had a knife in his hand and he tried to cut her clothes off, and she basically saw no other way to get out of this in order to protect herself than to stab and defend herself. And I think she really wanted to portray herself in front of the jury as being this meek, sort of timid, friendly young girl. And I think she thought she was going to be able to use that to her advantage, because no jury is going to want to convict someone who looks and acts like Ezra McCandless did.
The sheer brutality of Alex's injuries in relation to the lack of injuries on Ezra. That would be the thing to me, looking back on it, that if I were looking at this as a juror and I was seeing that this woman walked away from this with no broken bones, very little in the way of actual injuries, some superficial stuff, but then you look at Alex and he's stabbed a countless number of times, many of which could have been fatal, and by somebody who was 30, 40 pounds smaller than he was. To me, that was the biggest piece right there, is just the brutality of it, and what I would say was probably the most important piece here.
I know the public opinion was that she appeared as though this wasn't so impactful for her. I think the jury made some comments that she did not seem remorseful about what she did. My understanding is that she wore her hair in different ways every single day that the trial went on, that it seemed like she was enjoying the attention that she was getting surrounding the trial. I had heard that when Jason was testifying, that she almost seemed like she was trying to get his attention while he was testifying, that she wore a sweater that he gave to her. Without having spoken to him, I guess I can't say too much about how he feels. I'm sure it's a mix of emotions between guilt and just sadness and confusion. He was very close with Ezra. I imagine that when you're calling someone your wife and they're referring to you as your husband, and then you find out that they stab someone to death and then watch a trial take place and watch them get convicted of homicide, that's got to be very jarring. And again, like many other people involved in this case, I'm sure he took him a while to cope with everything that was happening.
She got all giddy and girlish looking at him. She got kind of all flustered, and I thought that was very bizarre. She wasn't believable. And obviously a 3-hour deliberation on a first-degree intentional homicide case by a jury, they didn't find her believable.
On November 1st, 2019, Ezra McCandless is convicted of first-degree intentional homicide for the murder of 24-year-old Alex Woodworth. She is later sentenced to life in prison with eligibility for parole after 50 years served.
I think she was in shock. I truly think that she thought she was going home at the end of the day. And she just stood there kind of stone-faced. She said she was sorry. She was sorry to the family, and that she loved Alex very much. I don't think the judge believed her. I mean, you stab someone 16 times and leave them to die. You didn't try to help them. You didn't call anyone to help them. You left them.
I think that comes down to how she testified, how she acted in the courtroom, the evidence that was there. I think that, they looked and examined from all sides, and they found her guilty.
Alex's parents, specifically his father, have publicly said that they do forgive Ezra for what she's done. Of course, forgiveness isn't going to bring their son back, but it probably helps them sleep a little bit better at night and helps them live with a sense of peace to be able to forgive her.
I actually look back on it and I'm proud of the work that we did, in the sense that somebody was eventually going to find that car and they were going to find Alex. But what evidence would have been lost as a result? How long would it have taken to find him? Maybe the knife's never recovered. Maybe the phone's never recovered. Footprint washes away. All this evidence that could have been lost. So I'm proud of the work that we as a team did that day. We kept working on it. It's very sad for the Woodworth family, but again, I like to think that because of the work we did that day, we were able to, save some evidence potentially that was able to be used at trial later on. So I think it's a fair sentence based on the crime.
I think in this case there is closure. We found out what happened. Again, based on the evidence, we found out what happened. I think the evidence told the whole story, whether or not Ezra wanted to tell the truth about what happened. And if I was a family member and Alex was someone that I cared about closely, I would feel some closure after this case. Yes, she would be in prison for a very long time, or potentially the rest of her life, and wouldn't be capable of doing something like this to somebody else ever again.
A life taken, a community grieving and in shock. But there is some small sense of peace and knowing that McCandless's jealousy won't claim another life. September 2015, Dallas, Texas. Police are called to a garage in a high-end apartment complex. A body has been found.
She had no warning that this was coming.
The bullet entered in the back of her skull and actually came out underneath her chin area.
But the profile of the victim and the manner of death lead investigators to believe that this is more than a random shooting.
I felt like there was more to the story. There was no random circumstance that caused this murder, that they were there for a specific reason and they were waiting on our victim.
What detectives soon uncover is a complex conspiracy.
Just the lengths that someone would go to try to get back with an ex-boyfriend.
I don't think she even thought about covering her tracks. It was all about getting this done. This focus of, I need to get Kendra Hatcher out of the way so I can get Ricky back.
Unfortunately, there are people in this world who would kill another human being and not give it a second thought.
This is the story of the tragic murder of Kendra Hatcher, the detailed and methodical search for her killer, and a motive which police soon learn was triggered by jealousy and rage. It's just after 8 p.m. on the evening of September 2nd, 2015. Police respond to a 911 call from a luxurious high-rise apartment building in Dallas's Uptown.
Dallas 911, where's emergency?
Hi, someone just got shot in the parking lot of the Gables Park 17. All I heard was screaming and then a loud pop, and then I saw her laying on the floor and there was like blood coming out of her neck. The people, they had a mask on, and I think it was a black Jeep Cherokee.
I responded to that and was told by the officers that were securing the scene outside that there was someone that was deceased inside of the parking lot.
I saw a white Toyota Camry pulled in a parking space. The driver's side of the vehicle, the victim was laying on the ground. There was a pool of blood around her head.
She was dressed in black doctor's scrubs, and her name was embroidered on the front of her shirt.
It was definite that she had been shot. Next to the body, there was a magazine from a handgun, a spent round, and a shell casing.
The police request the attendance of the medical examiner.
The medical examiner did arrive at the scene, and he was able to confirm that she was deceased from one gunshot wound to the head. The bullet entered in the back of her skull and actually came out underneath her chin area.
The police have already been able to confirm the identity of the deceased.
The officers, prior to my arrival, checked the license plate on the car, and that came back as Kendra Hatcher being the owner of the vehicle, which matched what was on her shirt also.
Detectives now begin to examine what evidence they can find.
The cell phone at the scene was given to the homicide investigators. Obviously, they wanted to find out what numbers had been recently called or dialed on that phone, what messages had come in. The pistol magazine, which was also found at the scene with 13 live rounds in it, I took back to our crime scene lab and processed for latent prints.
We looked for her purse, and we found out that her purse was missing. And so we just began doing our normal course of investigation, looking for witnesses and also video cameras inside the parking garage.
Officers established Kendra Hatcher's last movements.
I found out that Kendra was actually a resident in that building and that she was on her way home from work. September 2nd was her last day at work for a few days because she was going on a vacation.
Kendra's fiancé, Ricardo Ricky Paniagua, soon arrives.
One of the most painful parts of this whole story that I think of is that Ricky, the fiancé, was coming back into the apartment complex with dinner, and there was something going on. There were like police ropes and sirens and things were going on. He didn't know what was going on.
After speaking with him for a couple minutes, Ricky was able to tell me that him and Kendra had been dating for several months, and he was meeting Kendra at her apartment that evening to have dinner. Once he found out that we found Kendra deceased, you could just see just the color go from his body. He almost went into a state of shock once he was able to connect the dots.
Police begin to piece together more information about Kendra.
She had a very humble life growing up. Her mother owned a blanket shop in Springfield, Illinois. She was a cheerleader in high school, and she also was very devoted to her religion.
She was a rising star in her world of dentistry. She was someone that helped many, many people.
She worked with a clinic in the mid-cities between Dallas and Fort Worth that specialized in lower-income kids because she wanted to help kids.
She also volunteered her time giving back to poor children in South America, donating her abilities as a dentist and her time and her effort to help kids that couldn't afford dentistry.
In recent months, Ricky and Kendra have become very close.
She had told her family that she was super excited about meeting this guy. She said that they're clicking and that, he's a dermatologist and that they would probably end up moving in a year or so after his residency ended. And she just seemed to be really super happy and excited about life.
The most immediate clue to what has happened to Kendra comes from the footage captured on the apartment complex's security camera system.
On the surveillance footage, we were able to see the victim come in to the parking garage and go to a normal parking space. We also found a footage of an older model Jeep Cherokee. This Jeep Cherokee was waiting in the visitor portion of the parking garage, and they followed another vehicle in and parked in a parking space before our victim got there.
She started to get out of her car an assailant walked up and basically executed her, shot her in the head, took her purse, and fled.
The individual walked back to the back seat of the Jeep. The Jeep went out the wrong direction in the parking garage, made a U-turn, and then they exited.
But there are limitations to what the police can see on the CCTV.
After looking at the video, there was no way we could tell what kind of license plate was on that vehicle. And we had information that it may have been a paper tag.
Police feel the public might be able to help them.
They made the decision to release that tape to the public and say, hey, has anybody seen this vehicle, or do you know what's going on, or this is, this is very much of interest to us. And I think that was very, very key for them because that helped move the case along.
I felt like there was more to the story. There was no random circumstance that caused this murder, that they were there for a specific reason and they were waiting on our victim.
Police have some security footage, a murdered woman and a distraught fiancé. But they have little else to point to a motive for what clearly is the clinical killing of Kendra Hatcher. Dallas, Texas, 2015. Police are investigating the murder of 35-year-old dentist Kendra Hatcher. Most of the incident has been caught on security footage. Detectives have released the tape publicly in the hopes it might elicit a response and information. It does.
The media interest, it did help the case, obviously. I mean, when the news footage of the Jeep Cherokee leaving the garage, that jump-started the investigation when the owner called in.
The man is Jose Luis Ortiz, and he claims he lent his Jeep to a friend, Brenda Delgado.
Jose called in and said that he loaned his Jeep the same day of the murder to Brenda Delgado. Jose actually gave us a phone number for Brenda, and we called her. She told us, I'm house sitting for a friend over in Irving, and I don't have a ride, but if you can come pick me up, I'll come talk with you.
With this connection to the vehicle, Brenda Delgado immediately becomes a person of interest. Detectives try to establish more about her and her background.
Her parents immigrated from Mexico to America, so she still had dual citizenship in both countries. They were good working class folks. She graduated from an area high school. There wasn't money to go to college, so she started working. She got interested in the dental field. She was coming back to school and slowly finishing dental hygienist school when she was in her 30s.
The interesting thing about Brenda Delgado is that she is the former girlfriend of Ricky, the fiancé of Kendra Hatcher.
She had been with Mr. Paniagua several times, dating him. They broke it off. He then met Kendra Hatcher.
Brenda was, by all means, crazy in love with him, fascinated by him. They met the first time, got together, had a relationship. He broke it off. And then at some point after that, they started to get together casually. I would assume that meant they were probably hooking up, but it wasn't anything more. It wasn't a romantic relationship or a long-term relationship.
However, Brenda doesn't see things that way.
There were times where she would seem emotionally unstable. There would be times where she would be overly clingy and just kind of overly attached to him. And I felt like, that kind of fit in with the theme on this case, more so than a robbery.
It appears her view of the relationship has become obsessive.
He would be out for a run on Katy Trail here in Dallas, and she would suddenly run into him, make it appear that it was coincidental when in fact it wasn't. She was stalking him. So I think at that point she was just obsessed and she wanted to get him back any way she could.
For police, it's time to get face-to-face with Brenda Delgado.
Brenda gets called in for a voluntary interview, and she's cooperative. The Dallas police, smart as a bug, those folks taped everything.
Brenda gives the detectives her version of how she spent Wednesday, September 2nd, the day Kendra Hatcher was murdered.
Wednesday, I was in Carrollton.
Okay.
And I studied from maybe 12 all the way to like about 6. And then from 6 we went to Fuzzy's. We had some tacos at Fuzzy's in Carrollton.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Who were you studying with?
Billy, this guy, my classmate.
Okay. So how'd you get to Carrollton?
I got a ride to Carrollton.
Okay. Who gave you a ride?
Who gave me a ride? My friend, Crystal.
Crystal?
Mm-hmm.
She told me that early that morning she met up with her friend Crystal. They were having some problems with their vehicle, and she took it to Jose's shop. Jose's a mechanic. Jose looked at it and told her that he needed to work on it, and she borrowed his Jeep. She said that she had a study date that day with some friends, and Crystal dropped her off at a public library, and she spent most of the day studying. She also told me that the library had cameras, and it also had a sign-in log that I could check for her signature.
This level of detail immediately raises a red flag.
Most people don't pay attention to locations having cameras or sign-in logs. It was like it was already pre-formatted.
Brenda can also supply very specific details about where she was at the time of Kendra's death.
When I go to Chili's.
How did you get to the Chili's?
Billy took me.
Billy gave you a ride at Chili's? Okay.
I have the receipt in my bag. I can tell you exactly. It's all my clothes now.
Okay.
She probably figured if she just showed the receipt, an officer would say, sure, you weren't there, thank you, and that would be over. Fortunately, that's not the way it works in the world of crime.
Most people, when they come down and talk about murder, they're really nervous and kind of taken back. Either they're going to be overwhelmed emotionally because someone lost their life. They're going to be afraid because they're being questioned at a homicide investigation. She didn't seem to match any of those descriptions. She was very cool, calm, and collected, and very organized.
Detectives begin to get more specific with Delgado.
This is the picture of the young lady that got killed. Never seen her before?
I've never seen her.
Okay.
First, they started with Kendra Hatcher. Do you know this person? No, I've never met her. Well, she's engaged to Ricky Patiago. Do you know him? Oh, well, yes, Ricky and I are very close, but we're just friends now.
Detective Barnes needs to find out more about the vehicle used when the murder occurred.
I began to press her on who had had this Jeep. So when I pressed her on her location and whether she was driving the Jeep, she pointed a finger at Crystal and said, you need to talk with her.
Detectives now bring Brenda's friend Crystal Cortez in for questioning.
So she is in the police headquarters at the same time Brenda is, and they're interviewing both of them, taping both of them, and then super helpful for information back and forth.
There was a lot of different stories from Crystal. The first version was that she was looking for a parking space because she was going out to eat at a nearby restaurant, and she just happened to park inside the parking garage at the Gables 17, and she heard a loud noise and decided to leave the parking garage.
When I was up there, I heard a shot. Pow. I have my son in the back. So I said, no, you know what? Let me get out. I'm coming out. There's a guy running with a mask right in front of me. He stops, he looks dead at me, and I'm just like, horrid. I'm shaking literally at this point because I have my son in the back.
I confronted her with the fact that I actually saw someone get out of her vehicle and walk towards Dr. Hatcher.
Immediately, Crystal's story changes.
Crystal starts making up stories about she was just driving along the park with her son, and this scary man jumped in and told her to drive or he was going to kill her. And then she drove to the apartment complex and had no idea what happened.
However, she's confronted with the fact that there's no sign of anyone who could be considered to be her son on the tape.
Who else was in the vehicle with you?
Just my son, and he was asleep in the back, honestly.
No. That's not going to work either. I want to be able to trust you, and I want to be able to believe you. And I know that what you're telling me is not true.
She switched up the story to be this friend of Brenda's and her drove into the apartment complex, and the motive was going to be robbery, and then she was just going to drive the getaway car, and they were going to be away with some money, and she was going to get $500, and they were going to scare Kendra.
But Crystal Cortez has done no more than implicate herself.
When Crystal admitted that Brenda paid her $500 to go to the parking garage with this unknown male who was armed with a firearm, she self-admitted she put herself at the crime scene. That was enough to charge her. We charged her with capital murder.
Meanwhile, Brenda is still being interviewed by detectives.
The more I watched Brenda Delgado, the more I just knew she was lying. They kept the film running when they would leave the room or do you want to take a bathroom break or do you want some snacks or whatever, so they were friendly to her. But there would be times when she was on camera by herself, the detectives were out of the room, talking to Crystal Cortez. She was just like, oh. And she was doing things like this, and I think she was realizing the trouble that she had stepped into and that what was happening while the detectives were interviewing her.
Agent Barnes now turns up the heat on Delgado.
I began pressing Brenda really hard about where she was at, what she was doing, and why they were there, and what they were there for. And I think that once I began pressing buttons, Brenda felt like she was gonna unravel and end up being charged. And she just asked for an attorney.
Brenda clearly hasn't been to the scene of the murder. Detectives don't have enough evidence to charge her, but instinctively they know she is involved in some way.
They felt they did not have enough to issue a warrant for arrest for murder, but they wanted to hold her. They ran her background check, and she had a whole bunch of parking violations, enough to be arrested.
Collectively, we decided it would be better to just put her in jail for her traffic tickets than to charge her with murder and have to release her if we couldn't find enough details to prove it at that point.
But Brenda has other plans.
As soon as somebody comes down here, or she on her own pays the $300 or $400 that's owed, whatever's the fine that's not paid, as soon as you pay that, they release you immediately. And so it's not like you're sticking them in jail on some kind of a serious charge where they're going to have to wait and see a judge, and you're going to have to go through at least an 18-hour process. You're putting her in there. She's going to be out potentially in a couple 2 to 4 hours, which she was.
We found out that she left jail. She called a taxi to a local hospital, and she called her father and asked her father to pick her up.
Within hours, Brenda Delgado flees the state and crosses the border into Mexico.
She already had her backup plan in place, and at that point, we were just playing catch-up.
Detectives now believe that Brenda Delgado is at the center of the murder of Kendra Hatcher.
All of the early indicators on this investigation seem to point back to Brenda. Jose didn't know Kendra. Crystal didn't know Kendra. It all pointed back at Brenda. Brenda had the motive to want Kendra dead.
In Dallas, Texas, police are hunting for Brenda Delgado, a suspect in the murder of 35-year-old dentist Kendra Hatcher. Delgado has fled to Mexico, but investigators are continuing to question Crystal Cortez, Delgado's accomplice, who drove the Jeep from which the killer emerged to shoot Kendra. However, they are still trying to identify the shooter.
Just crunching down phone records between Brenda, Crystal. We also located a phone inside Brenda's apartment. We got phone records for that number, and all of these phones had a common phone number that they were communicating with. And we were able to locate that phone number and do some subpoenas for the phone records on that phone.
Police reach out to federal agencies for assistance.
The FBI got involved about a month after it happened. At the time, they hadn't identified the shooter in the case. They only knew him as Chris, so they were looking for help in that regard. They had a telephone number for Chris. We were able to obtain a search warrant to obtain the real-time location information associated with that phone. The pings on the phone brought us to an apartment complex in South Dallas.
That same day, Crystal is brought in for further questioning.
So there was the blue Sebring part right there.
Okay, was it an older looking Sebring?
No, this is like, it's Maybe
Like this color blue or dark blue?
No. It's a shiny blue.
She gives me a description of the shooter's car. And she said he drives a blue Chrysler Sebring. I picked my phone up and I called the FBI agents that were doing surveillance out in this parking lot and gave them the car description. And they told me that they see the car in the same parking lot. By watching the phone pings, they noticed the phone started moving. And they also noticed that the blue Chrysler Sebring was moving at the same time that the cell phone was moving. And it pulls over in a parking lot a couple blocks away from this apartment complex, and they walk up to him and make contact.
The man is Christopher Love. He is taken into custody and the car is impounded.
The car was towed to the auto pound, and I began interviewing Christopher Love. I interviewed him all the way through the course of the night into the early morning hours of October 2nd.
Searching the car, they didn't really find anything, and it was a little bit of a dead end.
Detectives have drawn a blank, so they turn to another police resource to intensify the investigation.
A canine that was in training at the time was brought to the Dallas Auto Pound. The canine had been trained to find explosives. That could be anywhere from gunpowder to bomb material C4.
They sniffed the car. The dog wisely stopped at a couple places. They found some residue, but they didn't find enough evidence yet. And then the dog zoomed in on the console in between the driver's and passenger seat, up one side and down the other. So that was super helpful. The investigators were able to remove the panel, and lo and behold, what's in there? A gun.
Christopher Love is confronted with what the canine has managed to uncover.
Once I showed him a picture of the firearm, it was like somebody letting the air out of a balloon. His body language, he just kind of sunk down in his chair. His head dropped. He tells me, okay. I was there. I was with Crystal. I got out of the Jeep to walk over to get Kendra's purse, and Crystal fired a shot from the Jeep out the window, and it hit Kendra. And he goes back into the Jeep and they drive away.
But Detective Barnes knows better.
I saw the video, and what he was describing was a scene out of a James Bond movie. There was no way that Crystal could throw the car in reverse, shoot out a passenger window while backing up, hit someone in the head, and one shot get it done. And also the magazine to the firearm was laying next to the body. So I knew that my shooter was there close range and standing beside Kendra whenever she died. There's a video camera from the parking garage on the other side. And that's how I know which side of the vehicle you got out of. And only one person got out of that vehicle.
I hopped in the jobs.
That one person that got out, the one person that got out of that vehicle was you. I actually pressed him a little bit about being the shooter. And when he didn't feel like there was any way out and there's no way to explain it other than to tell the truth, he asked for a lawyer. Well, I can tell you, man, that as far as this thing goes, that and so once he terminated the interview, I went back to my desk and began typing his murder warrant, capital murder warrant, and he knocked on the door again. He wanted to sit and talk with me, and I told him I had to read his Miranda warning again if he wanted to talk, and he said okay. And he just wanted to ask me one question. He wanted to know, why did we let Brenda go? I thought it was pretty significant. I thought that was him saying, hey, you got me, now I want you to get her.
Crystal Cortez is also bowing to the inevitable.
I really want to go home with my baby.
You're not trying to cover for
No, I'm not
anybody?
covering anybody. I don't want nothing to do with this. I want to go home now. I really do. I want to go to my baby, okay?
I understand that.
I'm trying to, I'm helping you guys with everything I can. I just want to go home to Ivan, okay? I know you guys are trying to help me. I'm trying to help you out. I'm not trying to cover for anybody.
So Crystal was charged with capital murder. At some point, she agreed to a deal. The deal was, if you are truthful And if you can testify against Brenda, we will recommend you for 35 years to life. You will be pleading guilty to capital murder.
They needed Crystal to get to Brenda. It's the only opportunity for her. 17 and a half years, you're eligible for parole. You may or may not get it, but you're eligible. She's got a child. She's got to be thinking about a whole lot of things, and she doesn't want to be locked up till the day she dies.
She was the one that kind of put the pieces together for law enforcement, kind of explained what happened and allowed law enforcement to arrest the other people that were involved in it.
Detectives know they have Crystal and Christopher, but now the spotlight turns to Brenda Delgado. They strongly suspect that she has manipulated the other two.
One of the things that I learned working this case, that Brenda was very good at reading people. She was able to sit down with someone, figure out who that person was, figure out where they were at in life, and specifically what they needed in life.
It was a business transaction for them. Should we beat him up? Should we kill her? Should we... they just handled it as if it was business.
She actually offered Crystal $500. At the time, Crystal was a single mother. She was out of work because her vehicle wasn't working, and she needed some mechanic work done to her vehicle, and she didn't have the money to get it done. Brenda was able to figure out that she needed money to be able to go to work every day and take care of her child, and so she just kind of dangled that carrot in front of Crystal to get her to participate in this murder.
And it is becoming apparent that Brenda had lied to Christopher in order to manipulate him even further.
Christopher Love was a self-proclaimed low-level drug dealer that just moved to this Dallas area, and he wanted to be Scarface. He was looking forward to being the next up-and-coming drug dealer in Dallas, and Brenda picked up on that, and that's what she offered him. She told Christopher that she was part of the drug cartel, and that Kendra was actually stealing drugs from the cartel, and if he participated in this murder, that he'd get a lifetime supply of drugs.
At the center of everything appears to be Brenda's jealousy of Ricky's newfound happiness with Kendra.
I think her obsession with Kendra Hatcher and losing Dr. Paniagua was stronger than anything she could think of. She just had one goal in mind, and that was to either hurt Dr. Paniagua, which was one of the very first things that came into their minds, or remove Kendra Hatcher from the picture.
On Brenda's phone, we looked into the notes portion of her phone, and we found an email address for Ricardo and also a password. Based on our interviews with Crystal told us that Brenda was able to track Ricardo, and she was able to know where he was at.
When Ricky and Brenda were hooking up the second time around, Ricky was still helping her, so they had a joint cell phone account, and apparently that account gave her access to his phone online. She had put tracking software on his phone. She was able to know where that phone was, where he was.
She would find his location and she would go and watch him. And then she would go have casual encounters where she would randomly bump into him and have conversations with him.
And her obsession also extended to Kendra.
In Brenda's phone, she had a bunch of pictures and videos she downloaded from Kendra's Facebook page. She had been stalking Ricardo and Kendra at the same time, just kind of staying up with their relationship. And I think she used social media as a way just to kind of figure out what they were doing.
It is becoming clear that Brenda was going to do whatever it took to achieve her objective.
Not only had she approached Crystal Cortez and Christopher Love, we interviewed some people that she had approached before about trying to convince them to do the same thing. Namely her cousin, having him attack Kendra Hatcher with a baseball bat. He ultimately declined to do so. So she had been trying to find someone who would carry this out for some time.
Crystal had got in deep and was doing what Brenda wanted.
And speaking with Crystal, She told me that she started going around just talking to people that they knew about, where they could get a gun, and also if they would be willing to help them in this murder. And through a mutual friend, a gentleman by the name of Kelly Ellis, Kelly knew Christopher Love, and he introduced them.
For whatever reason, they just fell in and the ball started rolling, and Crystal started agreeing to these things, and she found a shooter for Brenda. She agreed to drive the getaway vehicle. She helped Brenda get rid of evidence after the fact for $500 and some drugs.
Delgado was across the border, in her mind, safe from the authority of U.S. law enforcement.
My arrest authority ends in the state of Texas, and I think Brenda knew that. She felt like she was out of reach of the Dallas Police Department, but what she didn't plan for was that we have a partnership with the FBI, and they've got worldwide jurisdiction.
When people try to flee the U.S. to another country to escape justice, that always is a thorn in my side. So I always give those cases a little extra attention because I want to make sure that these people get caught and brought back to the U.S. I don't want people thinking that they can flee our borders and not answer the charges that are brought against them.
The FBI felt like the longer that she was free, the longer that she was evading law enforcement, that we were at risk for her committing another offense.
Dallas police now move to make Brenda Delgado an international fugitive from justice.
We were able to get her on the FBI most wanted list. I was pretty excited about it because I knew that I would get my shot at her again.
In 2016, Dallas police and the FBI are continuing their investigation into the murder of 35-year-old dentist Kendra Hatcher. Investigators have apprehended the man who pulled the trigger, Christopher Love, and the getaway driver, Crystal Cortez. However, they are still searching for the woman they believe orchestrated the crime, Brenda Delgado, who is a fugitive in Mexico and on the FBI's most wanted list. Detectives and agents now intensify their search for Delgado.
We started interviewing extended family members to see if we could get any cooperation from them. Initially, we weren't successful. They didn't want to cooperate, but ultimately some of them did. And that was very helpful in ultimately locating her.
I believe the phone was instrumental in tracking. They were able to pick up who she was calling and where money transfers were being made for her to have money to live on out there.
We received information that her family was sending her money via some money transfer business, and we were able to corroborate some of that. We saw some money going down to a state in Mexico where we knew she had relatives.
This information is further corroborated by a tip directly to investigators.
We received information that Brenda was at a specific location in Mexico, and the tipster began providing detailed information of where Brenda was at.
It allowed us to identify her exact location in Mexico, and we relayed that to Mexican Interpol officers, and they arrested her, within hours after we passed on that information.
Texas authorities moved to extradite Brenda Delgado from Mexico to the United States.
It's a long process to do that. I mean, our State Department has to reach out to whoever's the comparable authority in Mexico City. I mean, I don't remember how long that process took, but 6 months to a year. I mean, it was a good while.
For the process to work, certain conditions must be met.
Brenda was a dual citizen, Mexico citizenship and American citizenship, and Mexico has a standing policy that they do not extradite any of their nationals, any of their citizens, into a death penalty situation.
The deal was that she would not be put to death here in the States. So in order for us to apprehend her and bring her back, we had to agree to that.
We flew to Mexico on October 5th of 2016. We met Mexican authorities in a hangar at the airport. We searched her. We placed the restraints on her that she would be wearing on the flight. We were able to board the flight before any of the other passengers through the back entrance and flew back to Dallas-Fort Worth Airport nonstop.
I actually met her when she arrived here. I was the first face that she saw when she walked in the airport hangar. I'm a pretty competitive person, and even though I didn't get a chance to interview her again, in my mind, I was like, I told you I was gonna get you.
Prosecutors now need to prepare for 3 trials: Brenda Delgado, Crystal Cortez, and Christopher Love.
I've been working in the Dallas Homicide Unit for a little over 9 years. And out of every murderer that I've come across, Christopher Love is about as cold as any murderer that I've dealt with. No sign of remorse, no sign of emotion, no sign of regret.
This is a vicious, vicious, vicious person.
Christopher Love was sentenced to death. He's still on death row from what I understand, and I don't know if a date's been set yet for that.
Crystal Cortez's fate has already been more or less agreed.
Crystal was charged with capital murder as well, based on her agreement to testify against Christopher and also to testify against Brenda. She was given 35 years in prison.
In the case of Brenda Delgado, prosecutors paint a picture of a ruthless manipulator.
They did a great job at pointing out the specific facts of this investigation and just kind of like laying out who Brenda was. You know, that she's not just this pretty face that you see sitting in a courtroom, that this lady's a monster.
I don't think she even thought much about covering her tracks. It was all about getting this done. This focus of, I need to get Kendra Hatcher out of the way so I can get Ricky back.
Brenda had a very blank look on her face, almost like she was in disbelief that she was actually sitting in this courtroom and that she was being held accountable for what she did.
I don't really know that she felt right and wrong. I don't really know that she felt any guilt. The best word I can come up with is sociopathic.
She just appeared to be very nonchalant and like everything was okay, and it would be until the very end.
When the jury deliberate, they aren't long about coming to a decision.
So I was going down the escalator, and this is, we're less than 20 minutes since the jury went out, and I got a text message, we've got a verdict.
I think we startled some folks. We came back in a half an hour. It was not flippant, however. It was not off the cuff. We came back into the jury room, and someone suggested that we take a sample vote. This is the gut check vote. Let's just write down what we think, and then we'll start talking about it. So a woman volunteered to capture the notes. We all wrote down what we thought, and she opened them up, and they were all in one pile, one after the other. Guilty, 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 guilty.
That's very unusual. In a capital murder case, for the jury to come back, I heard estimates of 18 to 20 minutes that they deliberated. Yeah, that's unheard of. So they were convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that she committed this crime. First and foremost, this was a Dallas Police Department homicide investigation. And everybody understood their roles, and everybody understood that the primary goal was to identify everybody who was involved in this murder for hire and to get everybody arrested and in a courtroom to face the charges against them. And I think every agency did a great job at that.
I think working cases like this just makes it hard for you to trust individuals. But on a positive note, it's kind of offset by all the positives that I learned from working with the family and also the detectives on this case.
There may be a victory of sorts in the convictions, but for the family of Kendra Hatcher, there is just loss.
The thing that bothered me the most about this case was this could have been anyone. Kendra is a truly innocent victim, and she never saw any of this coming. For her to be ambushed and assassinated in a parking garage like an animal, it bothered me. And it is one of those things that you just never forget.
It's such a senseless, tragic loss of life that didn't need to happen. just the lengths that someone would go to try to get back with an ex-boyfriend. That's very chilling, and it's a stark reminder of kind of the world we live in.
Nothing anyone can do will bring Kendra Hatcher back, and for her family, the pain of losing her endures.
For the family, I don't feel there's closure. The word is a great word. We hear it and we think curtains are shut and we can no longer see what's behind them. But I do not believe that there is true closure in a case like this.
Their daughter, sister, was taken from them in an instant, without any warning and without any reason. So I don't know how you come to terms with that. It's got to be extremely difficult.
We can never bring back Kendra, but we can say, hey, we got the people that were responsible.